Hey, friends, welcome to episode 513 of the My 123 Cents podcast. I am your host, Kevin Huntsberger, joined this week by Chad Smart. Who are you in sunny California or is it rainy California this week?
It is sunny. It is cooler than it
Mhm.
has been last time I talked to you. So hopefully you are experiencing the heat that we had a week ago. Now we're just dealing with earthquakes and fires. And,
Mm.
and, and yeah, there's actually a section of of California about I'd say about 20 miles south of me that apparently is close to being the proverbial falling into the ocean part of California.
Mm.
So
Fun
but that's
times.
where all the rich people live. So, you know, I don't have to worry about it.
I get you. I understand. Well, you mentioned the weather, and I am, if you're watching the video, you notice I'm wearing a scarf this week, and that is because our topic, well, I'll show off my scarf first. It is a 20th anniversary SmackDown scarf, and today we're talking about 25 years of SmackDown, and we're going to go through the show and whatnot. But this scarf is unique in that it has a couple of autographs on it, if I can find them. And now I've got it upside down. This is when they changed the name also to SmackDown Live. But and I know you can't see it probably, but Matt Cardona and Brian Myers autographed this scarf. This was a prize I had won on the Major Wrestling Figure podcast a while back, obviously, because well, it's been 5 years since SmackDown, and Chad, you mentioned it over the weekend on Snapchat about the 25-year anniversary of SmackDown, and I couldn't believe one, I had kind of forgotten it had fallen off my radar that it had been 25 years. And really just over 25 years because SmackDown originally aired as a pilot on UPN back in April of 1999. And it took a few months to get it to the network. Now, let's flash back. Let's step back to 1999. We're both in our mid 20s. Uh, the Monday Night War is still pretty rampant, even though 99, I think we saw a big decline from the WCW side of things. Many would argue today that the addition of Thursday Thunder to the Nitro lineup on
Hmm.
TNN or TNT and TBS ultimately kind of hurt the viewership. What are your thoughts? Does an additional program hurt or help, hinder? Because this is also the era where Nitro ramps up to 3 hours. And we got to also take into consideration that some of these decisions are mandated by the networks and not necessarily by the wrestling company. I know some people have said Tony Khan shouldn't add another show, or why did they add 3 hours to Raw or another hour to Raw to make it 3 hours? I think some of these decisions many times are made by USA, by Viacom, by Turner, by Warner, whatever the broadcasting company is.
Hmm. Yeah. Two quick points before I get to answer your question. One, speaking of your scarf, I thought you were going to start wearing a ascot. I think you should
Mm,
go the Fred Jones way
there you go.
of style. And two, you have a slight buzz coming out of your microphone when you move it. So I don't know if you want to check your mic connections. It
Okay.
sounds like you're maybe enjoying yourself a little too much under on the show. But to your point about adding a show, I think, especially in the sense of SmackDown, I think they finally figured out how to do it um, in a better manner than what WCW did with Thunder. And especially, in the dying days of WCW when they were taping Thunder after Nitro, I think one, and this is something AEW needs to learn itself, 4 hour, 5 hour TV tapings do not go well
Hmm.
because you wear out the audience. People just, they have to work the next day. They want to get home. So, but when Thunder was separate and live, I think the other factor that SmackDown has is doing well is actually having a brand split. And I know, people complain about the WWE brand split. Sometimes it exists, sometimes it doesn't. People can just kind of freely go if that's the story they want to tell. But I think having two separate rosters is better for the product because then you're not getting the same thing.
Hmm.
It's not like Raw and Raw 2.0. And and that's right now with AEW and their two shows. I think that's they're still working on getting that balance because there are guys that only show up on Collision, but some guys do go back and forth. But yeah, if you have two separate rosters, it helps. The downfall is if you put all the guys that are over on one show, then the other show lacks, and you got to figure out how to get the viewers on that. Or just because people's schedules, do they only make time to watch one show and say, I only have so many hours in the week, so I'm going to get my wrestling fix on Monday or on Friday.
And I think in those early days of SmackDown, correct me if I'm wrong, but this was obviously before the purchase of WCW, so they're still competing with WCW. And I feel like SmackDown was on Thursday nights. They taped it on Tuesday. So it was a tape show. It wasn't live. Raw, I think, was still every other week. Raw was live, and then one week it was taped. I feel like, the shows were still kind of flowing together. So you were still getting the same, or, the storylines were picking up then on Thursday night after Raw. I like how it has kind of evolved. And like you said, we could nitpick and complain about the brand split and all that good stuff. But I do feel like they've done a good job, especially since going to Fox, of really kind of establishing SmackDown as its own show. I think it going live has been a great benefit. And I don't know, maybe some more of the inside scoop, but will it continue to be live on USA?
Yeah, I believe so.
Yeah.
And
That
I know
helps, don't you think?
Oh yeah, definitely. A live show helps because even if you don't read spoilers, to me, there's something about the energy of a tape show. It just, and I don't know if that's my own psychosis kicking in, knowing that it's a tape show. So knowing that, nothing major is going to happen. And because if something major does happen, you're going to hear about it. It's going to be all over social media. And I was going to say, yeah, there's also rumors that SmackDown now will go to 3 hours. I don't think that is true yet. We'll see once Raw leaves, for Netflix, if USA decides that they want that extra hour back of wrestling. So, and especially with them losing NXT as well, it's like going to the CW. I don't know how that will impact USA's financials and ad revenue. So,
is NXT on USA 1 hour or 2 hours?
2 hours.
It's 2 hours. Okay.
Yeah.
If SmackDown were to go to that third hour on Friday nights on USA, would it compete then with the Friday night AEW show Collision? Is it Collision?
Collision, yeah. They will. Technically, they're going. No, Rampage is on Friday. I'm sorry, Collision Saturday. So yeah, if they added a third hour, that third hour would go up against Rampage, which there's really no competition there because Rampage is basically the velocity jacked metal of AEW. There's really, I'm a huge AEW fan, and I can say this honestly: you can watch Rampage in 20 minutes if you DVR it because you're not going to miss anything fast forwarding through matches.
Do you think that when, like I said, I feel like the last 5 years, even though I haven't watched it consistently enough because we do have antenna, we sometimes, depending on how the weather is, I feel like we will get the Fox affiliate out of Cape Girardeau, Missouri, which is about an hour away from where I live. And I probably, in the last year or so, watched it a little more regularly. If we're home, I'll turn it on. There are pockets where I wasn't able to watch it or, would watch. And then probably in the last 6 months, the frustration was the local affiliate would cut the last probably minute of the show and go to a commercial break and then roll into their newscast. So that was always annoying. But I feel like since going to Fox and going live, for many, many years, SmackDown was considered the B show and, Raw was the superior one and yada, yada, yada. But I feel like both shows are, if not on an even level, SmackDown may have been a little bit even more revered as the A show, which was something I never really thought we'd see because Raw always felt like this great creation and however the incarnations. It always stayed on Monday nights. It always stayed, well, not always on USA, but it was always on Monday nights, and it was always on cable
Mm.
versus being on network television and sometimes some of those smaller affiliates like CW or UPN.
Yeah, and that's where also network influence comes into play
Mhm.
because, to my understanding, when SmackDown first showed up on Fox, Fox wanted Brock Lesnar on the show.
Yeah.
In the last couple of years, they've wanted Roman Reigns on the show. So, and obviously, if you put your top guys on the show, it's going to seem a little more important.
Yeah.
Um, but I do think, I think especially over the last 3 years, and especially maybe over the last 2 years specifically, that when the bloodline story has taken off, and that has been the focus of WWE programming. Since it's only on SmackDown, yeah, that's
Yeah.
going to be your treated as your main, I guess, show. I was trying to think of a different word than show, but programming. There we go. There's a 10-cent word.
Yeah, I feel like like you said with Brock Lesnar, because I believe it was the premiere on Fox is the night that Brock won the championship from Kofi in like 8 seconds, and the internet lost its
Yeah,
mind for a minute. So
yeah, yeah. Not a good look for WWE, but uh, I mean, again, maybe is that network influence that if they have Brock, they want him to be champ. Why
mhm.
you have to squash Kofi in the process, I don't know, but I guess in the whole, if someone new is tuning in and has never seen Brock Lesnar before, now he looks like a beast, but incarnate, if you will. But
Do you think being
uh,
on network is better than cable? I remember when we were kids, and I guess there's talk of, and I haven't seen anything official from WWE, so I'm intentionally waiting to post about it or go into depth
mm,
on a podcast about it. But allegedly, the return of Saturday Night's Main Event to NBC specifically.
yeah,
When we were kids, we watched wrestling through syndication on Sunday mornings, Saturday nights.
mm,
Very rarely, other than those Saturday night's main events, and then the main event where Hogan lost the championship to Andre at that first one. That was the first time wrestling had been on network television in prime time in like 30 years. Uh,
yeah,
and it was such a moment, I think. And nowadays, with streaming platforms and cable and everything else, does network TV have the cachet it had back in the 80s and 90s and even maybe early 2000s?
hmm. Possibly for uh, bragging rights or
Hmm.
just status, be like, oh, you are on broadcast. That is, but I think cable, has the more interesting shows now.
Hmm.
Um, Network television seems to be very, very formulaic and just formulaic, and not really seen as highbrow as cable is. But I was going to say, if you think being on network television might be better, ask anybody that's watched SmackDown over the last 3 months how much they enjoy the blackout screens, the um, I guess USA mutes the audio at points too, but
Hmm.
the over censoring of network television, because network television is oversaw by the FCC. Cable television is not overseen by the FCC, so they can get away
Wow.
with more.
I didn't know that.
Yes, that's why. I mean, technically, if uh, right now, if trying to think of who's on Raw, um, if the Miz wanted to come out and just lay down a promo full of f bombs, he could do that because
I guess that makes sense because they do, AEW, I know for a while there they were
mm,
allowed to say shit once an episode or something
yeah, I
allegedly.
think
So,
I think thanks to South Park about probably 10, 15 years ago now, doing an episode where they said shit, I think like over 100 times in the episode because they were dealing with curse words and
mm,
how that would this shit has become an acceptable um, cable word. And even if you watch FX shows, the more serious dramas,
Mhm.
you will get the occasional F bomb in there. So
Oh,
I think that's just evolving over time standards. So yeah, I think being on network is seen, normally because you're going to get a higher rating, you're going to get more people watching than on cable.
mhm.
But I think for freedom of what you're allowed to do, cable is probably best, and that's what it's going to be interesting to see once they go to Netflix, how much censoring or standards Netflix is going to put onto the program.
Yeah, that will be interesting. And I do have Netflix, so I will be watching Raw once again with some regularity. Those early days of SmackDown, though, I was telling you before we started recording, I was working at a TV station in Alabama that switched to UPN. And by the time SmackDown debuted on UPN, though, I had already moved because they had eliminated our jobs, and I was working in Indiana at that point, and was able to watch SmackDown on UPN. To me, the early memories of SmackDown was really heavily focused around the Triple H, Stephanie McMahon, Vince McMahon storyline. Uh, and Triple H had just won the championship from Mick Foley after SummerSlam that year, and they kind of hot potatoed it. And I think I don't remember if Vince McMahon won the championship from Triple H on SmackDown or if it was on a pay-per-view. And then I remember the story playing out on SmackDown. But that's probably one of my first early memories. And then Shawn Michaels being the guest referee. It was one of his first appearances. It felt like and interfering with The Rock and super kicking him. And so those are my early memories of SmackDown. What when you think of SmackDown, what do you think about besides it being, you know, a WWE wrestling show? Are there superstars? Are there moments or memories that come back to you as big key factors?
I
And we'll talk
mean,
about through the years, not just those early years.
yeah, I mean, there's one word: fisting. The
Uh,
giant fist on the stage. I don't.
yes.
I still don't understand what the um, reasoning was, and I don't know. I've seen rumors that they're bringing the fist back. I hope those are just rumors, much like the Goonies 2 rumor is
Yeah.
just something that the internet has decided to run with. But yeah, I was thinking myself, the early days of SmackDown, when did I watch? And I think because I was, living in Southern Illinois where you are now, I don't think we had a UPN station until the early 2000s. And I think I would go into the TV station that you and I worked for, and our engineers were wrestling fans. And we found the coordinates, they would pull it up on the satellite, and I would just sit in the engineering room and watch
Oh,
SmackDown.
okay.
Um, but yeah, I don't remember when I actually started watching it on actual television.
Hmm.
I think, um, I can remember Arnold Schwarzenegger being on. I don't know exactly when that was. And then in, uh, what would have been 2001, I believe, when I came out to LA to visit for the first time. I remember watching SmackDown, and that's when Triple H and um, it was against Benoit and Jericho. I guess it
Oh,
would have been
okay.
Austin and Triple H.
The
Um,
two-man power trip or whatever they were
yeah,
called.
yeah, against Jericho and Benoit, and so I think that was 2001.
Yeah, that seems about that time
Okay,
frame. Yeah.
right. So, so yeah, I mean, we were discussing before the show. Like, I have memories of SmackDown, but I couldn't tell you specifically when anything happened.
Do you as you were talking, and I don't know if it's a uh is it a growing up and maturing thing, or is it a function of we've watched it for this long and it is what it is, or I'm not sure, but there's a 6 year gap from when Raw happened and when SmackDown happened.
Mhm.
We were both fans growing up, 10 years old on. ish.
Mhm.
When Raw debuted in 1993, I was in college. I was almost 20 years old. When SmackDown debuts, I'm 25. I have a wife, a kid that's, a month or two away from being born. So life is different,
Mhm.
and, you're growing up and whatnot. So I was trying to think back to, obviously the excitement of Saturday Night's Main Event at age 12 was not the same as watching Raw in college
Mhm.
at our pizzeria on campus versus then watching it in my living room with a pregnant wife. Um, and I'm not, I'm just trying to articulate it and think about, the fact of I do think our fandom kind of ebbs and flows with where we are in our lives, or,
Mhm.
our ages, or whatever the case may be. I mean, obviously, I'm not as big a fan today as I was 40 years ago when I started watching, but I still enjoy it and I still like to watch it and be surprised. And I think part of it is the internet has ruined a lot of the surprise factor of it and then the negativity surrounding it. But also, I do think that nostalgia,
Mhm.
as I get older, I want to cling on to those moments and those memories. And maybe 20 years from now, if we're still around,
Mhm.
knock on wood, we'll look back fondly and nostalgically at this era. I don't know. What talk to me a little bit about that and what you think.
Yeah, it's interesting because when we started watching wrestling, WWE, like you said, was syndicated, but on USA they had primetime wrestling, which just
Yeah.
showed house matches and house show matches, I should say. And that was interesting. And then Raw debuted January of '93, so my freshman year of college.
Hmm.
I didn't have USA in the dorms, so I didn't even know Raw was a thing until I got home from college. And I've talked about it here on the show before. The first episode that I watched was the episode where the kid beat Razor Ramon.
Okay.
And I knew the kid from GWF, Lightning Kid. And I was like, oh man, this,
Yeah.
it's going to be a jobber here in WWF because he was going up against Razor Ramon. And then he beats Ramon. I'm like, that was a shocking moment. So, that kind of told me that anything can happen in the WWE. I don't think that happens as often as they would like you to believe these days,
Yeah.
but I do agree that fandom ebbs and flows, and I think part of it is, like you said, depending on what you have going on in your life, how much time you have. As kids, we had no responsibilities, we had no jobs to get up and go to. We could focus on the show and just dealing with that and reading the magazine, either WWE or the After Mags. And,
Hmm.
I couldn't tell you the last time I read a wrestling magazine. I know that yearly PWI 500 just came out, but again, that's something you see online. I don't go to the store and buy the magazine.
Yeah.
And I also think, depending on how good the product is. So, like for me in the mid 90s, WWE was stagnant. The NWO came into WCW, which made that interesting, but also got very repetitive. And then I discovered ECW, which I became a diehard ECW fan. And then when ECW and WCW faded away, and you only have WWE, yeah, your fandom's probably not going to be as big as it is. And so I think it also depends on how good wrestling the product is at the time, or if you really like Randy Orton, who's always going to be my go-to for uh, my lack of fandom. Um, but if the people you like aren't the ones getting the focus time
Hmm.
or the feature time, you're probably going to be out of it less. Or, as you said, just depending on life. Now that I have a girlfriend and who has gone with me to some AEW shows, but doesn't watch wrestling on TV.
Hmm.
You asked me last night or right before we started recording, did I watch the first episode of SmackDown on USN? I'm like, oh, I watched the first half hour because I was at her place, and then she got home from work, and then we decided to go out and get something to eat
Yeah.
or do something. So I then I've read the results of what happened online. I'm like, okay, I don't need to go back and watch the show.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. The other funny factor of this is, and we've talked about this ad nauseum as well. I've only been to, at least in my memory banks, I've only been to one SmackDown, like not a SmackDown. How back in the day, you
Mm.
and I went to a SmackDown house show here in Carbondale, but I've only been to one SmackDown taping, or in this case, it was a live show. It was in Evansville, Indiana, back in January of 2020, so right before COVID hit. And the reason I went was Heath Hatton, Tyler Hatton, my friend, was there as an extra and may have been utilized. He ended up not being used there, but the next week on Raw, he ended up being Becky Lynch's doctor when she got, I think Asuka had sprayed mist in her eyes. But I had gone with the intent to see Tyler, and I think Brandon Espinoza, who's another indie wrestler here in Southern Illinois and St. Louis area, was one of the guys carrying King Corbin out. So I got to see him. But anyway, I'm telling you all that. I just pulled that show up to see, kind of the results and what had happened. And I don't remember probably
Mhm.
85% of what happened that night. But 40 years ago in December will be
Yeah.
my first WWF house show, my first wrestling house show. And I can tell you everything that happened that night. So it's just weird to me how that stuff kind of sticks with you. And we've talked
Mhm.
about it before, remembering those first WrestleManias and Survivor Series and Royal Rumbles and who came in when and who got eliminated. But I couldn't tell you probably half of what happened at the 2024 Royal. So it's just weird to me. And I want to
Mhm.
segue into that too. Have you been? I think you've probably been to more live SmackDowns than I have been to, obviously.
Yeah, I'm trying to think. I know I went to like a month after WrestleMania 22. I went to a Raw slash SmackDown taping in St. Louis.
Okay.
And that was when the JBL, I think, had won the title and they had a celebration for him. That's all I
Well, you
remember
would
from the
have
show.
still been, you would have been still in Southern Illinois then. I
Yeah,
wonder why I didn't
yeah,
go with you.
because it was a Monday night and it was going to be a taping and you had to get up at 4 a.m.
Uh,
And I realized I could do my job half asleep and didn't care. Um, um, yeah, I'm trying to think if I've been to a SmackDown out here in LA, and I mean, surely I have, but yeah, I don't remember. And even the Raws that I've been to, I don't remember a lot about what happened. Like, I think the last Raw that I went to, the thing that I remember most is I took my friend Sean with me, who wasn't really a wrestling fan, but he was like, um, because at the time I had a connection, I could get free tickets, and so we went, and Hogan came out, and then he brought out Snoop Dogg, and that was
mm,
like the big thing we took away from
yeah,
the show. I couldn't tell you what the main event was that night,
yeah.
or anybody, or even who was wrestling on the show, but I remember that aspect. And I remember another one, which I think was before a WrestleMania down in Anaheim, where the only thing I remember is when we walked in, they were doing, because we got there a little bit late because traffic sucks in LA, and Anaheim is not LA, no matter what the Angels will tell you on their team name. Uh, but I think they had Flair, Shawn Michaels, and maybe Hogan in the ring doing like a Legends panel to talk about the upcoming title match. Again, I think this was before WrestleMania, but really all I remember from that show is we were sitting on the floor. And when John Cena's music hit, this kid who was probably about 6 years old, we were right on the aisle. He jumped out in the aisle and he was like dancing around and just having the greatest time of his life. And I'm like, I wish I could watch it the way he's watching it. I wish I could have that fandom back,
Yeah.
of and not be the cynical internet wrestling, commentator
Yeah.
type person. But yeah, I don't. I'm sitting here. I I I couldn't tell you a SmackDown that I went to
Okay.
otherwise. So
I wasn't
maybe I
sure,
haven't.
and like I said, I know we never stuck around at a WrestleMania
Mhm.
weekend or
Well, they weren't
week.
doing SmackDown when we went. I guess the last time here in LA they did it, but
Yeah.
they did SmackDown on Friday. But we came back to my
Oh
place and watched
yeah,
Ring of
that's
Honor.
right. Yeah.
But I think like 32 would have been the previous one. Did they do a live SmackDown? I don't
Well,
know.
I don't know if it was live. It would have probably been recorded like that Tuesday
Mm.
after. I think they were recording some because I think when we were in New York for or New Jersey for
Mm.
29, because we stayed the longest there, but I think we did something else that Tuesday and didn't because I think we talked about debated going to
Mm.
SmackDown, but we did not. Um, yeah, you do get that fandom fatigue and all that good stuff too when you go to
Yeah.
Hall of Fame and some indie shows and then of course, WrestleMania and then Raw and then sticking around for SmackDown, it could lead to that fatigue, I think, for sure.
Yeah.
Do you think, what do you think of what, were there moments, were there memories through the last 25 years other than, I talked a little bit earlier about the Triple H thing. To me, probably the biggest moment memory I have from SmackDown is the show that aired 2 or 3 days after the 9/11 attacks. Um, I feel like because it was wrestling, it probably, and maybe it did get some mainstream coverage. I don't remember, but
I think so because I believe it was the first
it was the first
major
public
gathering.
display, yeah,
Yeah.
after the attacks. And um, I think it's a double-edged sword because I think that some people, probably the cynicals, and maybe and the cynics, maybe you fall into this, I don't know, but was it right to do that? Did they cross a line? Should they have waited? And then should they have talked about the fact? I think it showed resiliency, and it showed, that we can come together and that we have more in common than we are apart. And
Mm,
and I know this was an international incident, and not something domestic, but I do think it united. And even though it was wrestling, and it has its critics and criticisms and whatnot, um, to me it showed a lot of bravery for everyone, not just the men and women who got in the ring, but the camera operators, the
mm,
people, the referees, the commentators, and the fans, the people that actually came and showed up. It showed a lot of. I don't know that I would have been as willing to participate
mm,
that close after, but I think and it's one of those moments that still 23 years later, it sticks in my head, and I can still see all those wrestlers and superstars
mm.
showing up on the ramp and having that resolve to get in there and entertain. So
Yeah. No, I think it was. I, I don't want to necessarily say the right thing to do because
mhm.
that's debatable. I think it was a good thing for them to do. Um, One, because it showed like standing up to the terrorists, saying like you're not going to defeat us. We're not going to, you know,
Mhm.
hide and cower. I think the negative, and this is, not just me saying this, is what a lot of people have said, is that the talking points from the wrestlers to giving their thoughts on it. Yes, the Stephanie McMahon one probably should not have aired
Yeah,
because that was where she talked about how compared the terrorists to like the government going after Vince, and
yeah, yeah.
especially in nowadays with what we know,
Right.
not the best thing to say. But
Didn't age
again, I
well.
mean, yeah, I mean, she was what, 23, 22,
Yeah, she was a
it
kid.
was, yeah. So, and it's emotional, you're not, don't necessarily say the smartest things or the best things when you're, in those situations. So, yeah, that can be, you can criticize that all you want. But I think as a whole, it was the thing to do because I mean, eventually we as a society had to get back to quote unquote normal.
Mhm.
And, just like after COVID, we have to get back doing things.
Yeah.
So, and I believe the show was in Texas, and I don't think ISIS had any backup plan to take out the first public gathering afterwards. So I think,
Yeah.
we're probably okay. Um, and I heard Bin Laden was a huge Batista fan, so probably good. Uh, no, yeah, it was good. I'm trying to think, myself of memories that over the show, and I'm sure, like, if you said something to me, I'd be like, oh yeah, okay, I remember that. But as a whole, there's not a lot of, I could be like, oh, Austin did that thing, or oh, remember when
Right.
The Rock did that, had that promo. It's just like, and I think part of that is, as we were just saying earlier, like things start to blend together more as
Mhm.
you get older and as
Yeah.
you're not focused primarily on wrestling. So,
Well, I know Brock suplexed or superplexed Big Show and the ring destroyed. I think that was
yes, I
on a
believe that was SmackDown.
SmackDown. They replicated it years later, I think, with Mark Henry in the Big
Mm,
Show, and then Braun Strowman in the Big Show. Uh,
yeah.
so they went back to that a few times. I'm just off the top of my head because I know there are shows, or I know there are lists out there on the internet that
Mm.
highlight and list these things, but I'm just going from what I remember. And again, I wasn't of the 1,300 plus episodes that have aired,
Mhm.
I've seen a fraction of those and a fraction of those full shows even as
Mhm.
well. So again, we're not consuming it the way we did when we were kids. And, if I were 10 or 11 years old, I
Yeah.
would have probably been watching more regularly. Um,
Yeah.
but as we talk about the internet kind of being a detriment, that's where the internet is a good thing, where you can go back and watch clips and consume it, like you said, DVRing it, whether it's AEW or WWE, that fast forward button and getting to the meat of what you want to watch has been beneficial as well. What do you think of the you know we talked earlier, Sunday Night Heat and Velocity and some of those other shows that were there and then went away. To me, I'm amazed that Raw has sustained for
Mhm.
31 years now and seems like it's going to get new life on
Netflix.
Netflix and SmackDown 25 years now.
Mhm.
What about those two shows do you think have made them so viable and so ingrained in the wrestling vernacular?
I would say it helps that WWE was the national, not
Sure.
it wasn't the NWA, the National Wrestling Alliance, but WWE was or WWF was the first national product.
Right.
And so, Vince McMahon, for all his faults, was a great marketer.
Right.
And, when people think wrestling, they think WWE,
Mm-hmm.
WWF. That's they to the non-wrestling fan, they probably don't realize that there is AEW, NWA, world class. It's just everything is
Yeah.
it's like all video game systems are Nintendos to anyone over the age of 30.
All soda is Coke.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, so I think in that regard, Raw, because of the primetime wrestling lineage that then transferred over into Raw, it wasn't like a new show was starting up. It was just a continuation, a new coat of paint, basically. And those first, few years of Raw being 1 hour taped every 3 weeks and with the, live show after the pay-per-view. So I think that helped. And then when SmackDown launched, because you had The Rock, who was a big star at the time and probably a bigger star now. Um, I think the marketing, again, it comes back to marketing. And it's just, they've, because there have been times where WWE product is not interesting, is not that good, where they've, you know, need better talent that they're focusing on. But because of just having that um, the fans that are going to stick with them are always good. And that's, we've talked about it before, where you have your core audience that is going to be there no matter what, basically.
Right.
Um, and then it's how do you attract the non-wrestling fan? And again, I think that comes back to promotion. If you can get people on, whenever WrestleMania rolls around or big show, you get guys going on the Tonight Show.
Yeah.
I'm kind of surprised Roman Reigns hasn't hosted Saturday Night Live yet. You would think, that they would try to get that, and who knows, maybe they've tried and they just haven't been able to. But um, basically, what I'm saying is it's been around wrestling. It's like the definitive bedrock of wrestling right now. So, um, you
Do
know,
you think with the Netflix deal, you
mhm,
know, multi-billion-dollar deal, we talked about how Fox had made some demands allegedly for talent on
mhm.
SmackDown on Friday nights. Do we see Netflix doing that? Will the product change on Netflix? I know that they're allegedly going to become a little more edgy, back to probably not
Attitude
quite
Era,
the Attitude Era, but
yeah,
there's talk that there'll be a little bit more edge, and obviously on Netflix the rules are different.
yeah. Adam Copeland's still in AEW though.
Will SmackDown uh go back to that kind of B show vibe, going back to USA. Netflix is a whole new world, a whole new frontier, and a different way to present. And I think eventually maybe
Yeah.
everything gets shifted over there. I don't know. I like the fact that they've kind of diversified and they've got stuff on Peacock. They're going to
Mhm.
have stuff on Netflix. There's still stuff on uh, standard television, and then
Yeah.
stuff on basic
Yeah.
cable. So, um, do you think Raw going to Netflix hurts SmackDown on USA?
I don't think so. I'm curious, and I know Netflix doesn't release numbers for viewing, which I'm curious if that will change if somehow numbers will get leaked,
Mm-hmm.
or because ratings are the all important be
Right.
all end all in wrestling. They
Sure.
tell you if something is good or not. Um, I think I think more people probably still have access to USA than Netflix, although I could be completely wrong. I don't know what the cord cutting numbers are right now.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm curious how many people will sign up for Netflix that may not have it right now once Raw goes over there. I am one of those people. I will um, sign back up for Netflix so that I can have access to it. I'm curious, with Raw, is it like every episode going to be available, you know,
Right.
for eternity now while it's on there?
Yeah.
Or are you only going to have a certain amount of time to watch a show and then it, you know,
Yeah.
also with Peacock, is Peacock going to keep the WWE network? Are they going to move PLEs to Netflix? I think these are questions that have come up that no one's really,
Yeah.
sure of. And I'm sure Netflix would love to get the PLEs over there. But to your main question, I think I would say for the first, well, maybe through WrestleMania season, Raw will probably be the focus
Mm-hmm.
because it's the new shiny toy.
Yeah.
Where SmackDown, even though it's moving to USA, it's still the same. USA has had Raw and
Yeah.
NXT, so there's nothing new really to attract viewers there, but to try to get people to sign up and watch Raw. And then, as I just said, it's going to be interesting because will you have to watch Raw live, or if you come in late, will you be able to restart it from the beginning, or
Yeah.
do you have to wait till the end? Um, because you can't DVR it like you could, if it was on USA.
Right.
Yeah, and I'm curious. I know fans have been saying like they need to go back to the Attitude Era type stuff because PG is lame, which I'm not of that mindset. I think the show can still be good. Um, and again, this is my bias being the Chikara fan that I was, which was very family friendly,
Mm-hmm.
and the shows were good. But it, and I think also, in the time we live in now, if they went back to the full Attitude Era, more people would be outraged at things that they were doing because it wasn't, um, PC or woke. Um, so it'll be an interesting balance. I did read that they expect to have commercials on the show, so it won't be a commercial-free
Mm.
broadcast. So that will be interesting to see how they integrate the commercials into the show as well. And if you have the ad-free platform for Netflix, does that mean you'll get maybe a backstage segment instead
Yeah.
of the commercial, or a package on like they do for the Peacock PLEs? So I don't know, but yes, I do. To long-windedly answer your question, I think Raw will be the focus at least through WrestleMania 41, 42, 41,
41. Yep.
41. Yeah.
Well, all that being said, I think we have laid the smackdown on the 25-year anniversary of SmackDown. Anything else, Chad, you want to add before we wrap up this week's episode?
Yeah, not necessarily WWE related, but I believe starting, especially by the time the show drops, but as we are recording, I believe Heels, the wrestling drama that originally aired on Stars with the guy that played the Green Arrow who fought Cody
Yeah,
Rhodes.
I can see his face. I can't think of his name
Yeah, I
either.
want to say Stephen Ambrose, and I know that's not it. But
Amel.
anyway, Stephen
Amel.
Amell. Yeah, yes. That is now on Netflix. Speaking of Netflix, so if you have not watched it, it's
I
two
have not.
seasons.
Okay.
It's a good show, although their depiction of what an indie wrestling promotion is like is maybe a bit Hollywoodish.
Okay.
But the rumors are if it does well on Netflix, Netflix may pick it up for another
Oh,
season. And it ends, spoiler, season 2 does end on some cliffhangers. So it would be nice to get another season out of that show. And I never would have expected Mike O'Malley, the host of he wasn't the host of Nick Arcade, but he was a host of a Nickelodeon game show, and then he was
mhm.
on um,
Yes, dear.
Yes Dear. Yeah, that's the name totally escaped me, but I never would have picked him to be cast as the main rival wrestling promoter guy. But what do you know?
I'll have
That's
to check it out, and
yeah.
we'll do a review of it down the road.
All right. Yes, I highly recommend it. It is a good show, but again, it's just you kind of have to go in understanding it's a television show.
Yes.
And CM Punk has a few cameo appearances. So
Oh, cool. Well, friends, that's going to do it for episode 512. Thank you so much for joining us. Actually, I think it's 513. But anyway, thank you for joining us. Be sure to leave a review. Let us know what's on your mind, and we will see you next time.